Hey everyone, it's Finn. My pronouns are he, him. Today we're going to be talking about something that is a little uncomfortable, but it's very important. It's inclusivity in Al-Anon, the problem that no one wants to talk about. It's something that is rarely brought up in meetings, but it is really important. This isn't a video to criticize Al-Anon. It's a program I love and I want it to be better. So let's open up the conversation about inclusivity and get into the nitty gritty. Hey friends, welcome back to Al-Anon Recovery Hacks, where we break down recovery into practical everyday tools. If you're ready for more serenity and less chaos, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, just a quick note, I'm not a spokesperson for Al-Anon or any other 12-step group. Everything I share here is based on my own personal experience, strength, and hope. Take what you like and leave the rest. All right, the first topic I want to bring up is the lack of diversity in regards to race and ethnicity in Al-Anon. Now, here's the reality. Al-Anon is overwhelmingly white. Recent survey found that 93% of Al-Anon members identified as white, and that leaves just a sliver of space for everyone else: Black, Latino, Asian, Indigenous people. It's not a lot of diversity. And BIPOC members are typically walking into a meeting and immediately feeling like they don't belong. I mean, they're only the they probably are going to be the only person in the room. If you've done any reading on Reddit forums, you'll hear people say like that they were told their race is an outside issue, and they feel like I bring my identity with me every time I walk into a meeting. So how is that an outside issue? And we have a kind of a culture of not talking about it, and that becomes a form of exclusion. Race does affect every aspect of people's lives, and ignoring it doesn't make it go away. People of color need to be able to speak about their daily struggles with alcoholism, as well as any other challenges that come up that the program can help them with, including racism. So ideally, they wouldn't be forced to share these experiences with a room full of white people who at best can't relate and at worst don't welcome those kind of shares. There's a deeper kind of layer of discomfort here that is in a cultural mismatch. Some members of Al-Anon from Indigenous or Latinx backgrounds, for example, may say that the structure of Al-Anon doesn't fit how their communities process emotional things or relate to their spirituality. There's a lot of God language that is very specific to Christian traditions, and studies have shown that like mutual help groups that are rooted in Christian kind of confessional formats and spiritual phrasing can be off-putting to groups like American Indians, Black and Latinx individuals. Some groups, especially online, have created Al-Anon BIPOC only spaces where people can be seen and heard comfortably. But even then, Al-Anon comes after them. Recently, in the name of inclusivity, Al-Anon World Service recently banned groups from using words like Black, BIPOC, LGBTQ in their meeting names. And so it's made it harder for marginalized folks to find each other and create that safe space. I get the desire for like neutrality, but when you strip identity from a safe space, you make that space invisible to members who need it. And for many, that invisibility is exactly the thing they came to Al-Anon to escape. They want to be seen and heard. Incidentally, after the recent change to Al-Anon's policy regarding group names, there was an outcry, and Al-Anon World Service has agreed to reconsider their policy, but we will see what happens. If we're serious about Tradition 5, that each group should be autonomous and have one purpose to help families of alcoholics, then we need to make sure that there is a space for everyone to feel welcome. The second topic I want to talk about is the kind of ageism or generational gap in Al-Anon. Why does the program often skew towards older adults? And right now, the average Al-Anon member is around 55, 56 years old. And recent surveys are showing like 55% of members are over age 54 and only like 5% are under 35. So there's a huge gap there. And, it matters for the newcomer. When you walk into a room full of retirees and empty nesters, even though they're kind and well meaning, it can be really hard to relate to the shares. Their kids are grown, they have lived through different cultural shifts. Their daily stressors are not going to be the same as a younger person. So, why is it that Al Anon attracts older people and seems to repel younger people? I mean, there could be several reasons. One is that, you know, it takes a while for people to acknowledge that they have alcoholism in their life and trauma and that it impacts their health and mental health and behavior. So they can take a little while to get here. However, there's also some factors that Al-Anon can address. I feel like the language in Al-Anon is quite outdated. Terms like God might be replaced with higher power, defects of character, moral inventory. These are kind of antiquated phrases and they can feel judgmental or religious and just downright confusing to younger people who are more secular and have a different frame of reference. There's a reluctance in Al-Anon to update the language of the 12 steps. It's basically impossible to do so without um, overhauling all their policies. They've made it so two-thirds of groups have to agree on any one change. So the program's formats also, the readings, the long shares, no crosstalk, these rituals can feel stiff and overly formal to Gen Zs or millennials who are used to more interactive or digital spaces. And that's if young people even find the meetings. I mean, let's face it, the most people don't know what Al-Anon is. It's rarely discussed in places where young people might be, in schools and in social media. Why is that? I mean, public outreach is usually done by members in their 60s and 70s. And I know from my own experience in service that a lot of these positions at the area and district level, they're limited to people who have been in Al-Anon for 3 to 6 years minimum. And the terms for these positions are 3 years. It can be a huge commitment for someone who's younger or new to the program. So there's really like this system that weeds out younger people even participating in public outreach and getting people aware of Al-Anon. So there is a huge problem that Al-Anon needs to address to be more welcoming to young people. The third part I want to talk about is the gender and sexual orientation disparities. You may have noticed Al-Anon is predominantly female. In fact, surveys show only about 16% of members are male. And, from what I've heard personally, men feel pretty awkward and like outsiders when they come into a meeting, and it's all women. And then there's LGBTQ folks. I mean, I know from my own experience that having to code switch or avoid talking about relationships in meetings is very common. And it's, a matter of safety for some of us that we need to code switch in the meetings. Now, there are men's and women's meetings, but again, Al-Anon is trying to remove those identifiers so that now men can't find each other, or LGBT friendly meetings are no longer visible. And so again, when people can't find themselves and they don't identify, they're not going to stay. And uh, I can just share a quick story about, not feeling welcome as a trans person in Al-Anon. After about 7 years of immersing myself in Al-Anon and taking service positions and going to 4 meetings a week, I was deep into it. And something happened that made me really consider dropping out of Al-Anon and never coming back. It was a moment when the groups in my state were debating an issue that was really close to me. And they were debating whether to ensure that the reading of the steps always referred to God as he, him. And as a trans person and as a non religious person, it was very triggering. Al Anon says right in the steps that I get to have a higher power of my own choosing. I get to define my God. Um, but it was only privately I had that. In public, I still had to pretend that God was gendered and male. And now people were making sure that the readings of the steps were he, him, and that anybody who tried to change it was told, you can't do that. So it felt like cisgender people were shoving me back into a spiritual closet. And it's offensive to me that I would be banned from reading the steps unless I got on board with that gendered God language. And thankfully, before I decided to leave, I found some trans and non binary meetings online that helped me feel like I belonged again. They allowed members to use the pronouns of their choice when referring to God. And it was like this subtle shift could keep me coming back, and it ultimately saved my recovery. But to cisgender people, they just don't understand the significance of that change. That is exactly why we need LGBT people involved in Al-Anon service. That's why we need people of color in service, because these little things make a huge difference. All right, I wanted to touch on something that I brought up a little bit earlier, which is that spirituality and religion can also be a place where we notice a disparity. And Al Anon says it's spiritual but not religious. But for folks who come in and they're atheist or agnostic or have religious trauma, the God language can be a major barrier. And Al Anon is a spiritual program, but the implication that a lot of people feel when they come in is that if they don't accept God, then they're not going to accept and succeed in the program. But I think that there is room to expand the idea of a higher power, of our understanding. It is a flexible term, but the way Al-Anon is approaching it is off-putting. So in practice, 99% of meetings are at churches. Let's look at this apparent affiliation with the Christian religion. And in the steps, we're told um, that we should not be affiliated with any other groups. But here we are, all sitting in churches all the time. How is that going to affect someone who's Muslim? Are Jewish people going to feel comfortable always walking into a church? I mean, we really need to think about spaces and how inclusive those are. Another thing is, the wording that you, the term God, the fact that we are so militant about keeping it in there is a problem. I mean, the majority of the world practices different religions than ours and have different words for their higher powers. And maybe they have multiple gods. So the fact that we're using this term that is not inclusive is a problem. Um, and then if you're in Al-Anon, you're resisting even the notion of a higher power, you may be looked down upon, like you're not ready. And unfortunately, this attitude can drive people away. So we really need to take a look at our terminology to make sure that it is a welcoming place for people who have um, no faith, who people are agnostic, and that welcomes them in so that they can get something out of the program. Okay, so here's the deal. Al-Anon has a tradition that we just avoid discussing outside issues. But again, like, let's remind everyone that race, gender, age, faith is central to our lived experience. It is not an outside issue. It's inside of all of us. And these things are not distractions from recovery. They're part of what we are sometimes recovering from: discrimination, isolation, not being heard. And if we erase those parts of the program, we're erasing people. We have a responsibility to make this program live up to its ideals. And we need to advocate for things like identity-based meetings. We need to, instead of shut them down, we need to amplify them, make them more available. And personally, maybe you have some ideas about what we can do. I would love to hear your suggestions. It's up to all of us in our very own way to bring in these outside perspectives that aren't being heard, and to acknowledge, like, who's not in the room at these business meetings. If we are talking about how to involve young people in Al-Anon and everybody's over 65 in the room, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to know what they need. You need to get the right people in the room. So I think asking these questions is tough, and sometimes it can really push buttons if people have been there a long time and want to keep doing it the way they've always done it. But Al-Anon needs to keep evolving and growing, or it's going to become completely obsolete. So I hope you got something out of this. Again, like, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please comment, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks for being here. If today's hack helped, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need it. Don't forget to subscribe for more tools for the journey. And remember, we can't change them, but we can change how we show up. See you next time.